Hello everyone, welcome to the next installment of live performance tutorials. And today we're going to talk a little bit about how to actually plan out and build a live set. Last time we talked about this idea of storytelling in live sets and playing with intensity over time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to construct the set, how I go about that, and some of the techniques that you may want to apply into designing your own set. So as you remember last time, what we had was, if we think about designing a set over time, we've got intensity and then time over here. So this is intensity and then time. And we can think about how we want to construct that and how we want to build that over time. And usually with my sets, and this is focused on a club set, I kind of start a little bit slower and then kind of get more intense and then finish on a big peak and sort of come up that way. Just to make that a little bit more clear here. You can see that here, starting slow, building up intensity and ending on a big bang. And that's kind of a nice way to build things in. It kind of brings people into the environment, gives them a chance to get used to the sounds and then really boost the intensity through the set. But this time I wanted to play with something different. I had in mind kind of starting the set with a bang and then coming down and then building back up again. So bringing people on a bit more of an arc. And so here with this set, what I want to do is kind of start up here, then go down in intensity, then kind of come back up and really finish on a big bang at the end there. So that's kind of more of the arc that I'm going to do. So that's the kind of general first thing, thinking about that kind of what's that story that I want to tell. But then if we think about what are some of the details, how would that actually work? Well, there's a couple things we may want to consider. First of all, as I mentioned, this is going to be a club set, a club techno set. So I want people to dance. That means that there's going to be a bit of a structure of this overall flow, but also within each of the tracks. And that's another piece, is that when I play, and certainly in a club environment, I tend to think about tracks as roughly 6-minute to 8-minute discrete pieces that may either be pre-planned or improvised on the fly, but roughly having sonic character and themes and samples and sounds changing at that roughly 6 to 8-minute time. And of course, within those tracks, there's also changes over time. So that's one thing to think about. What's the kind of style of the set? Another thing is around how much time do we have? So with this particular set, the time I actually have is 75 minutes. So that's, I know that starting here and then ending at 75 minutes. So that's roughly the time that I have. So if I think about sort of what that might mean for the structure of the set, if I think about roughly these kind of areas here, that kind of gives me roughly a third, sort of around those things. Then I can also think about what are the ways that I want to bring this intensity and play with this. So for a dance music set, the easiest way to think about that is beats per minute. So if one of the things I'm starting with here is starting at 140 beats per minute, going down here to say either 130 or 135, and then coming back up here to 150 and even higher than that at the end there. So that gives me sort of a rough kind of thing to play with. The other thing is whether there's other people involved or other instruments or other sounds. And for this particular set, this is going to be the launch of a new single with my friend Hannah. Hanaway is her artist name. And she's going to be singing live vocals. And that's going to be happening right here. So I want to think about how do I lead up to that and what comes after that in the set. So that gives me a rough way of thinking about what that structure is going to look like and how those kind of things come together. So even with this here, you could approach this in a number of different ways. My approach is to now take the next step, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes, of what are the actual tracks? What are the songs that I already have either written that I've played before or new things that I want to try out that would fit in this environment? Or if you actually prefer a more of an improvisational style, you could just stop here and actually think about, okay, I'm going to make this up on the fly and build this arc as I go. But either way, that gives you that structure. And the structure I find is helpful for a couple of reasons. One is specifically with the time. With some performances you do, it may be an open-ended start and stop time, but usually in a club environment, there's a specific start time and end time, either because you've got multiple artists on the set or you're following a DJ and there's a DJ afterwards. There's a running order that's been posted, and it's important that you start on time and end on time. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about that structure, because if you're not necessarily paying attention, if you get to the 75 minutes and you're still at this part, then you haven't actually necessarily built that arc. So this gives a way to sort of pay attention to the time and those kind of things. So this gives me the starting point. And now I'm going to think about what are the actual tracks? What are the songs that I want to put in place to be able to build up this kind of set? So now we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about that. Okay, so we talked a little bit about designing the overall arc and the structure of the set. So how do we actually put that into practice and build a set list? Well, I'm going to show you the way I build set lists, which might be a little bit of overkill, but for me, it really works for a couple of different reasons. So let me show you kind of what we're talking about here. So this is the spreadsheet that I use for planning out my live sets. And as you can see, I've got all my different sets, so I can go back and see what I've played in July, what I played in June, BMS. Actually, this was canceled because I had COVID. What I played in Amsterdam, and what I played last time in Berlin. And there's a lot going on here. So let's start with this particular set, the next one that's coming up. So that's September 22nd. So what I've got here is a list of the different tracks that I'm going to play. I've got the BPMs. I've got how long each track is, and then when that track is actually going to start. So I kind of can roughly align that graph that we showed earlier that I drew on the whiteboard with what that actually looks like in terms of the timing of the set. And the way I've structured this is I've got a list of, these are all of my tracks and songs that are a combination of ones that have been produced and released, ones that are sort of still sketches, ones that are just improvisation, ones that are sort of work in progress that I'm trying to sort of flesh out, maybe turn from a jam into a produced track, or go the other way, take a produced track and remix it on the fly and do something different with some of the predefined sounds that I have. So with this, I can go through and look at, okay, what are the different tracks that I have? What are the different elements? What are the BPMs where they work well? And then how do I fit that into the set? So with this particular one, as I mentioned, I want to start with some high intensity, then go down tempo a little bit, and then go up tempo and finish with a big bang at the end. So the way I've structured this is with this track called Jackhammer, which is a new one that I'm working on using a jackhammer sample when they were fixing up the street of the tram stop right in front of my apartment. So I recorded that jackhammer sound with my phone, which leads to a pretty intense rhythm. And then moving into another track called Amsterdam, which is also pretty heavy. Then going down tempo into sort of a more softer one, Plant Bass, which uses the Instro Skyon to get some randomization through the modular. A couple of different pre-produced tracks here that I can build on and sort of riff on top of. And then going up tempo. And then this is the new single where Hannah is going to sing. So I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes around how that structure looks. And then moving into another unreleased track, and then one that I've played before. And that's one of the things when I'm designing the set, I talked about the parameters, things to think about, like where you're playing, how long you're playing, the intensity, those kind of things. But another thing is to think about, okay, if you're going to be on stage for that 60 minutes or 75 minutes, how do you build in enough kind of rest time where there's a balance between being right on the edge and doing things you've never done before and really pushing the envelope, improvising, not quite sure what's going to happen, but then also having some times where you do know what's going to happen to give you time to repatch if you're using modular, or to change your presets or patterns and be able to help you manage some of those kind of things. So that's the way I've got these structured, where these first two are very much improvised, where I'm kind of playing with patterns, using different synths, bringing things in and out, playing with some background samples. This one is as well. Madness of Crowds and Awenzu and Tanzan rely on some of the backing tracks and some of the stems that I'm playing back through the Octatrack. And then I can improvise new bass lines, take pieces in and out, and in effect kind of remix my own tracks on the fly. The same with this one here, and then Little Private Emergency is also very much improvised, and that gives me some flexibility on the timing. And speaking of the timing, what I've done here with the spreadsheet is I can adjust. So here I've got 10 minutes for the first track. Maybe that's a little bit long, so I can say, okay, maybe I'm going to do 9 minutes for that. And you'll see all of these adjust. So I know at the end here, these tracks are 1 hour and 9 minutes at the moment. And I've got 1 hour and 15 minutes to play, starting at 10 p.m. and with this current setup, ending at 10 past 11. So as I mentioned, this may seem like a bit of overkill, but when you're in that club environment and you've got someone waiting to play after you, it's not really that fair to just have an open-ended set and say, I'll finish kind of whenever, because they're waiting to play. And if there's a fixed end time for the night, if you play long, that may be taking away time from them. So that's not really fair to them if they want to play their full hour or their full 90 minutes or whatever that is. So I really try and make sure that I start on time and end on time. And right now I've got 1 hour and 15 minutes. This is 1 hour and 9 minutes. So I've got a little bit of a buffer time. One of the reasons why I do like having a 10-minute opener is that it gives me a bit of time to get used to the crowd, get used to the system, even though I've done a sound check, make sure that the levels are right and I'm bringing different kind of things in. It gives me a chance to get comfortable with that set. I also make it really clear here where I need to adjust the tempo, going either down or up. And we'll talk about that in detail in another session around how you actually manage those transitions. But speaking of transitions, we might as well talk about that a little bit now. I also have these other, just get rid of that for a second here. I've tried to think about how I'm going to transition in and how I'm going to transition out of these different tracks. So this is very much still a work in progress, so that's actually left over. So I don't actually have that train sample, but for this one, I want to start out with the jackhammer sample, loop, drop kick. So that's how I'm going to start in with this. So that gives me a bit of a signal of how I'm going to do those. And then I want to be able to transition between these two tracks. So I may think about fading kick, key pats, and then I can also think about those transitions in and out. So once again, thinking about how you're going to do these transitions in advance can really help, especially depending on what instruments you have. So if you're, for example, doing an all modular set, transitions can be a little bit tricky in terms of what you're bringing in and what you're bringing out. When I play, I actually have multiple instruments. So I've got the analog rhythm for drums and percussion, the Octatrack for samples, the modular synth and other synths and some effects and delay pedals and so on. So that gives me some flexibility where I can, for example, take out the Octatrack samples, keep the analog rhythm pattern going, change the Octatrack bank and pattern, then bring those back up, then fade out the rhythm, change that pattern, bring it back up again. So it gives me some different flexibility there. And sometimes I improvise that on the fly, but it does help to be able to think about how you're going to do those kind of things, as well as thinking about how you're going to manage the tempo. So for example, with the going with this track here, playing at 135, one of the ways that I manage this tempo transition is the Octatrack has a really nice tape stop effect. So what I can do is turn the slider, turn that on which really sort of feels like a tape kind of going down to the stop. And it really, everything falls apart. It's kind of chaotic. The delay is really up. It's kind of going all over the place. You can't really tell what the beat is anymore. When that's happening, I can up the tempo from 135 to 150, which is a pretty big jump. But when I bring in the kick of Then I Come Home, this is very much like a UK grime style. So even though it's playing at 150, it doesn't feel that fast because the kick is not going on the fours like it would be for a regular techno track. So that gives me a way to bring that tempo up. And then when I move into the next track, the kicks are on the fours. So it feels like a natural progression and people don't necessarily notice that much. So you can do those kind of smooth transitions, or you can kind of do a DJ style. When I saw Jamaica Suit play, she did a really nice effect, which is also common in transitions, where she was playing around 138, 137, and then turned the tempo all the way down to about like 110 or even below that to really slow things down, and then turned it back up to like 145. So that gives a nice sort of transition effect. Or you can do an abrupt transition, which is kind of nice. So it's all a creative choice how you want to do that. So that gives it the way I sort of build out this kind of planning. And then the next piece is, okay, how do I actually remember what those different patterns and what those different instruments are going to be? So I'm just going to show you this briefly now, and the next video will really dive into this in a lot more detail, how we actually build up those sounds and instruments. So here I actually have what's going to be playing lead, what's going to be playing bass, and what's going to be playing effects. So I can kind of keep track of that at a high level, and also know if I'm going to be using the same instrument in two different tracks, but they have different patches, there needs to be some way to transition from one patch to another. Sometimes it can sound cool if the patch just sort of changes instantly, but other times that can sound a bit odd. You may want to fade that out and have time to bring that back in. And then I also have this other section that goes into the details of, okay, what are the actual patterns? What are the banks on the analog rhythm and the octatrack? What am I going to be using, and remember how I'm going to do that. You may be able to remember that on the fly, but I need to write that down. And we'll talk a little bit in another session about different ways to organize your set. If you're really organized, you can have it track 1 is bank 1, track 2 is bank 2, track 3 is bank 3. For myself, I never get that organized. I make songs all the time. I change things all the time. So I really need to be able to make that happen. And then the other thing I'll just show quickly is I also have these little notes to myself around what are the sound design notes, what are the things that I want to do before the set, and then what are the performance notes. And this is kind of my style of planned improvisation, where I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I do know for some things, for example, I do want to send the breaks to the Zen delay. I want to play with that kind of dub style. I want to be able to fill, to add some more steps. I want to be able to pump the bass in different sections. So this gives me some starting points, some things to think about, and just kind of remember as I'm kind of building out that set. Of course, even though all this is written out, sometimes I just completely change that depending on if people are really grooving on a rhythm. I may keep that rolling. When I was playing in Amsterdam, I just found like a really cool sweet spot with the filter on the Zen delay, and I kind of ignored what I had written down, and I really rode that and kind of bring that sound in, played with the stereo width, and it was a pretty cool kind of effect. So this is the way I've been building that set. So this is kind of the translation from that initial thinking about that story arc, starting with the bang, coming down, coming back up again. I may actually still think about dropping this maybe down to 130, but that may be a little bit slow. So BPM is not the only way to do intensity, as we talked about. It also might be the number of instruments, the frequency spectrum, maybe not having such quite intense tracks. These two tracks actually here, Madness of Crowds and Dictator, those are actually pretty intense. So maybe I'll move those around or replace those with different tracks. But it gives me a way to kind of play with that. So that's it for today. What I'll do is I'll put this spreadsheet available for you to download. You can play with that and yeah, use that to organize your own live sets. In our next video, I'm going to go into more detail on kind of what's into these columns here. So these three here are really about what instruments am I going to use? So there's a big selection there. Okay, what am I going to bring? What do I want to bring? How much space do I have? What do I really love playing with? Is there something I really love, an acid sound? Or do I have a brand new synth I want to experiment with? Or do I have something that I haven't used in a while and I want to try that out? So thinking about your gear selection. And then once you have that, then thinking about how are you going to manage all the different sounds and what are you going to plan in advance and what are you going to do on the fly. And once again, that's a very creative individual choice, whether you're someone like a Jack Noise, where her sets are amazing and she patches on the fly. So every set is completely different. Other people take the approach where everything is pre-programmed in advance and everything changes on the beat or not on the beat with different pattern changes. For myself, I like kind of riding somewhere in the middle, playing on Brian Eno's idea of a balance between control and surrender. The spreadsheet here gives me some control. I know what's going to happen and roughly what that order is, but I can also surrender to the moment of what's speaking to me, what the crowd is into, how things are going, and improvise along with that. So yeah, so that gives you a bit of an overview of how I use that spreadsheet. And as I said, I'll make that available for you to download. All right, so I hope that gives you a good overview of how this set is going to be constructed, the songs that are going to be played, some of the ideas around transitions, when I'm going to change the tempo, and some of those notes that I make to myself. And in our next tutorial, we're going to go sort of one step further and think about what is the sound design. So today we've been talking more about the set design, the overall structure, what are the tracks that are going to be played, how is that going to progress over time, playing with the intensity and the timing, bringing in those different elements. But the next thing we're going to talk about is how do I actually construct the sounds? And that can actually be from a number of different decisions. First of all, might be what gear do I have and what sounds can those make? Another one might be what gear do I want to bring? Do I really want to focus on a particular synth or really highlight the modular or highlight samples or a live vocalist? Are there different elements there? And how do I actually select the gear and the effects and the mixer and those kind of things that I'm going to need to pull that together? So that will be our topic of our next tutorial. So with that, hope this was helpful and hope to see you on the dance floor. I'll post a link to the set where this is actually going to happen at Fitzroy Club on September 22nd, launching our new single, Then I Come Home. And if you're watching this after that, I'll make sure to post a video of the performance so you can get an idea of how that sort of planning translated into the live performance, with, of course, the inevitable changes of things that happen on the fly, of responding to the audience, seeing what works, what doesn't. And of course, the only thing that's guaranteed to happen in a live set is that something unexpected will happen, something will go wrong. So being able to play with that and ride with that. So hope you have a great day, and thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.